Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another recording. Today, I just want to get straight into it. I have a question at the end of this recording. So, first of all, I'm going to give you the context behind what I'm going to talk about. Then, I'll give you my opinion. And then, I will ask you what are your own thoughts on it. So, the context here is I recently saw a short film in the midst of other people, basically like an audience watching the short film. And the short film was on the story of a mother and a son who had a clash over the son's choice of career that unfortunately landed him in a situation of poverty, although the mother herself wasn't exactly rich either. So what then happened during the discussion portion after the short film had been aired, there were several comments to the effect of poor people are lazy. There are some comments to the effect of lazy youths. Many youths are lazy, so many youths being young people that are considered young by the society. So my opinion, which is the second part of this recording, is that obviously that isn't the case. I don't believe that to be the case in any instance. I even go as far as believing that whatever pillar of laziness that you have, and that even if a poor person, it's sad enough that we have to use such harsh terms because, yes, I get that poverty has a dictionary definition, but also it has become, in a social context, a pejorative term. So even if you have four pillars of laziness and this said poor person meets all those pillars of laziness, I don't think calling the person lazy helps anything, all right? You can make the argument that you calling the person lazy is trying to spur them into action. But then again, we also hear statements like you catch more flies with honey. And while I believe that to be true to an extent, and that is the honey statement, I just don't see, insulting people who are simply at the lowest tier of the capitalist society to be necessary. And all what they are is, as I said, the lowest tier of the capitalist society in terms of disposable resources, or resources that can be used to afford essential services. Because when societies were being drafted by people who lived long before us, and be it that we agreed on these systems or be it that these systems were imposed on us, these people didn't leave the likes of food and clean water, right? So water that has gone through filtration systems off the table. So even food, cooked food or harvested ingredients, these things weren't left off the table for the consumer market. They were not restricted as goods that cannot be sold. Take, for example, goods that cannot be sold. Oxygen can't be sold. You think oxygen can be sold because it occurs freely in nature? Wait until you see some clever billionaire pollute the air. So we also have social services that in most countries are essentially free. So while we pay for it via taxes as citizenry to our governments in many countries, we don't pay directly the direct provider or direct providing companies for things like government-run hospitals, statewide cleaning services, and all of that. So the part of the essentials required for living weren't left out of the what I will call the capitalist consumer chopping block, consumer market chopping block. So goods that can be sold, and those will be deemed ethical. So even essential medications, so like inhalers for asthmatic patients, can be priced at will by proprietors for any amount deemed necessary. And, it's all fun and games to call someone lazy for being poor until the price of food increases exponentially overnight. And then you yourself, who thought you were getting by fine or were even rich to some extent, your riches are then under scrutiny because of things that are not in your control. And that is the part of this argument. That's another part of this argument that I want to really magnify, because this is just my opinion. I'm going to close this by asking you what your own opinion is. But another thing I want to magnify is, can you say that you are in control of your finances? Whatever job you have, be it that you are employed in some establishment, can you say that that establishment isn't going to go down in the future, in the near future, and then leave you out of a job? Or you are self-employed? In fact, obviously, I don't even need to ask the self-employed people this question, because they know the risks directly. They know what it means to earn let's use a common currency, $1. They know what it means to lose it, even just $1. They know what it means to gain $1 million and even lose $500. They understand profit and loss. They understand these things. I imagine they do. And even if you want to say you've gotten to a point where no, you're comfortable, you have nothing to worry about, are you sure? Or whatever clientele, whatever resources that you think you have today, are you sure that they are going to be there for you in the next coming set of days? And that brings me to the people who, are unfortunately at the lowest base of the pyramid, the capitalist pyramid, because it works like a pyramid in the sense that ideally money is a zero-sum game. Like, I understand there's value creation, there is activities of central banks and all of that, but ideally in our day-to-day exchanges, money works like a zero-sum game. So we have people who gain more, and then we have essentially the biggest losers, and that isn't to be misunderstood as a pejorative term. I'm saying the biggest losers in the sense that they lose money more because they do not have services to provide, or the services that they provide aren't as in need as other services. So your argument to that might be, oh, well, they should just come up with things that will fetch them profit. Fine and good, that is nice. But then again, this is what is happening, right? And will possibly still happen for the foreseeable future unless some form of change happens stylishly. And stylishly is the only approach I can imagine. So take, for example, someone within the, we're just going to use the word poor layer of society, eventually comes up with that business you keep telling them to come up with. And then they gain enough traction. What stops an envious person from a higher level in society mimicking the business and then obviously stealing the customers, and in the process, of course, reducing the efforts of the lower tier person because of their riches and then their access to media outlets to poison the minds of society towards the product offered by the poorer individual. So that's what happens. I get that isn't a rule of the theory of capitalism, but of course, given that capitalism, a byproduct of it is the fear of scarcity and the fear of competition and the fear of, needing to hoard money in the case of emergencies and all of that. Given these byproducts of capitalism and not the dictates of capitalism itself, these things can happen. So to then add to the pain of being at the lowest link in the chain of society in terms of availability of resources is simply unnecessary to me. you might argue that yes, it's a call to action. A call to action is different from an insult. Yes, I get that the word lazy has a dictionary definition, but the context matters. Most people, well, I don't have the exact percentages, but I have a belief that there are many people who in the world today, in English, obviously, each language has its own definition of what translation of the word lazy or interpretation of lazy. But most people understand that term lazy to be more pejorative because the implication there is you have simply done nothing. Even if it is true you have done nothing, there's always a reason to why someone hasn't done anything, right? If you say the person is a perpetual joy seeker, the joy isn't valueless. But then you say, okay, the person is a leech. How else, can certain people exist in society? It's an unfortunate thing because it's easy to throw out statements like get a job or start a business when you aren't in those shoes. Even if you were once in those shoes and you are able to get out, you need to also acknowledge the luck that was on your side, the luck that you were able to get employed and weren't met with some form of bias or anything, the luck that whatever business risk you took worked out in the end. So there is that as well. So I just see it as unnecessary, but I want to let you know, I want to know what you think as well, which is me, this is the third part, me just throwing the question to you. What do you think? Is it fair to tell people who are not doing well in terms of, no, that's a poor framing. No, people who society understands to be poor, people who do not have as many resources, is it fair to call them lazy? Is it fair to just throw around the get a job statements to them, right? Is it fair? Is it, warranted to, quote unquote, spur them into action? That's just where I need your thoughts. It's something that after the screening, I was surprised to hear that people still think, oh, okay, yeah, it's still their fault. You don't mind them. They are not serious people. When they're serious, even the moderator said something that was baffling. She said, there are people in their 60s that are still begging. If she had said people are begging in their 60s, I'm like, okay, still begging. The implication is this is something you grow out of, like, feeding from a bottle as a child. If you can say still feeding from a bottle, if you're referencing a teenager who still eats food in the way that is typically ascribed to children, to young children, right? But when it comes to something that all of us in society essentially have no control over, we've seen many instances of big companies fall down. We've seen rich people become poor. We've seen poor people become rich. The thing is, we want to tell ourselves that there is a formula, but there isn't. The magnates we have today, they are not at rest, right? That isn't to say that they are particularly hardworking people. Obviously, we also understand that hard work doesn't reflect your resource availability. That one is settled, but they are worried people. In the same way that commoners, I don't know the proper term for people who, in terms of resource availability, lie in between, but people who lie in between the upper echelon and the bottom tier of society in terms of resource availability, everyone across the whole pyramid worries about resource availability, because just like I said earlier, ideally it works like a zero-sum game in terms of our day-to-day exchanges. I buy something, I give it to Mr. X. Mr. X has gained, take for example, that thing was $10. Mr. X has gained $10, I have lost $10. So that's what I mean by the zero-sum game concept of money. And of course, when, let's say, I keep only buying things and have nothing to sell in return, that's what brought about the term that I used earlier, the biggest loser. All right, so it's not fair, right? This person has spent all that they had and will probably have contributing to other parts of the economy. You understand? And they unfortunately haven't been able to rise to the occasion as they are required to by many to have a quote unquote decent life. So it's just something that has been on my mind, and I thought to maybe ask it to you. Again, this is just like me holding my candle to the wind. My candle today is that no, it's not fair to, in any instance, even if it's very obvious, quote or no quote, that they are quote unquote being lazy. But my candle in the wind is that no, it's not fair to call anyone who is poor, who isn't doing as well as you think that they should in terms of finances. It's not fair to call them poor, but your responses can be the wind to my candle in this situation. What do you think? Do you think that, well, the insults are warranted in some instances? Give your opinion on what kind of instances is it fair that we can say things like, oh, okay, yes, they're just being poor, like they are the situations for their own poverty. You understand? I have layered responses to even, people call the controlled substance abuse, the alcohol abuse. I have responses to those. So it's just that I don't want to let this particular recording be too lengthy. We've already had quite a few lengthy recordings already this week, so I just want this one to go straight to the point. My candle in the wind for this recording is: do you think that poor people should be called names? All right, just for the sake of not having, should they be? And also, it also goes beyond just being called names. I understand that, or at least would hope that most people have the morality to not go out of their way looking for poor people to call them names, but also the ostracization of poor people from the better part of society, in terms of we tend to be not so eager to have associations with people who do not have the resources, even down to friendships, because of the fear. Again, these are just kind of like the unspoken byproducts of a capitalist society. So the fear of, for example, being made to a host for a leech, all right? That's a common fear. There's also the common fear of when it comes to, relationships, in terms of like the family unit, planning a family unit. For some people, do not want people with low incomes or people with very next to no incomes as potential people to build family units with. You understand? So, but the main question here is the insults, the names, are they warranted? And then by extension also the social ostracization of the lower class. I think that is the proper term. People are saying it's just upper and then lower class. So even need to also your own, or not you, but people who believe in a supposed middle class, we need to also kind of think about that a lot more. But yeah, that's just what I wanted to ask today. Thank you for listening to this recording. My candles being held out to the wind. You provide the wind. I'll see if it still holds up, but if it doesn't, well, then it's good to have reason to rethink things. Okay.